So, and then, should we talk about how 3D works?
Well, I think it's important that we talk about how 3D works.
Okay, so new 3D works different than old 3D. Old 3D was the red and blue glasses. It gave people headaches. Took a long time for your eyes to adjust to the strange color. And the thing about old 3D was, for the most part, the image on the screen looked two-dimensional, but you could have stuff look like it was coming out of the screen at you.
Right.
Which was fun, but at the same time never really worked as an illusion, because if my hand is out of the screen at you and then I bring it up over the frame, it just cuts off, because there's still a projected image. Okay? The way stereoscopic 3D works is...
Which is the newer 3D. It's
right.
The one like the real 3D or the, I think, the Disney 3D.
Right.
Those are all projected in stereoscopic 3D.
Right. Stereoscopic 3D, cameras usually only have one eyeball. You add a second camera to make a second eyeball, and you're projecting two simultaneous images on the screen, overlaying. The glasses are there to help you turn those images into one, but in so doing, you create the image, you create the illusion of a three-dimensional image.
You create depth.
Right. And so instead of old 3D, where it felt like stuff was coming off the screen at you, new 3D drops the picture back. So it looks more like you're standing at a window looking outside and seeing the three-dimensional image on the other side of the glass.
Right.
People still complain about headaches and nausea, but not as much. Most 3D manufacturers blame this on the glasses, and they're busy working on glassless 3D technology, which I think the Nintendo 3DS has already.
Yeah.
And some cell phones have already. They're looking at releasing it in home television soon. The problem with a theater is, if you have a 3D television at home, you can sit down and calibrate it to where you like to sit so that you get the 3D image.
And the best image out of that television.
Right. And if you're in a theater, you have to sit in an available seat. So how do I get and everybody's eyesight is a little bit different. So how do you accommodate all these people without glasses sitting in a theater for a 3D experience? And that's what's really hanging them up on the theatrical side. TVs are coming down the pipe very soon. Theatrical is not.
Yeah. They also have 3D projections for concerts. I know you've seen it, and that works a little bit differently in the aspect, because obviously you don't wear glasses for that 3D image, but it's a different type of setup. It's still a projected image, and it's just projected off a few different screens at certain angles that project that light pattern to be a three-dimensional holographic style projection. But that is in concerts and live venues for the most part. Probably not going to end up having that as film, at least not for the foreseeable future on that, because it's still a very expensive technology, and it's not feasible to do a film style experience in that, because you're only projecting like one or very few images that can move, instead of an entire scenery, an entire world that you'd have to project for film. Right.
So now, the reason why we're talking about high frame rate 3D is there's a lot of hype about it, a lot of reaction to it, a lot of negative reaction to it.
There were reports that people were vomiting, headaches, nausea.
And none of the reports ever said it was happening more than usual. Most of the early reports that started kind of the blitz about high frame rate 3D was about just how real it looked.
Right.
And it didn't make you think the place you were in was real, as much as it looked like a stage play or a soap opera or something like that, where it was too detailed, it looked too much like it was staged, you know. And I'll be honest, I kind of had that experience in a lot of places. The sweeping panoramas in New Zealand were beautiful.
Absolutely.
Real places looked great, I thought. But the sets
Yeah.
That was concerning.
Absolutely, and even some of the CGI manufacturers, like the railway kind of experience, kind of was a mix. You know, you had parts of that were really well done, and the 3D definitely played to that. It made it easier to follow along on 3D with those action moving sequences, and they flowed better in a lot of the time, but there were a few that did seem a little more fake-ish real.
Right. And that was the other thing that high frame rate 3D really accommodated. Like, outside, your exteriors looked great. And high frame rate 3D also really accommodated moving shots. Mm-hmm. If you remember, you know, Avatar, the Avengers, some of those sweeping moving shots where they moved really fast, you know, or had helicopter shots, you started to lose the illusion a little bit and it got fuzzy. And that's because at that low frame rate with all that motion and all that motion blur, your brain's trying to pick out the images and fill in all those blanks, and it starts to fall behind the illusion. High frame rate 3D, on the other hand, because of the sharpness, I think, there's not as much motion blur, so you don't start separating out the image in your head, and you stay in it even through the motion. So it definitely has its benefits. Mm-hmm. You know, you can now move the camera with 3D at pretty high paces, and you know, if you're shooting outside, if you're shooting in a real place, it looks great
with the natural lighting. You know, it does. Absolutely.
Peter Jackson's people made that stuff look really good.
Oh, absolutely.
And so the question is, would we do the Sonata Chronicles in high frame rate 3D?